Hi, everyone. My name's Ed Beck, and I am the Open and Online Learning Specialist at SUNY Oneonta. And I'm joined here today with two faculty members from our Department of Education. And we're going to tell you a little bit about a multi-year project that we undertook using grant funding from the SUNY OER Impact Funds in order to create an original OER textbook for education. But before we get too far into that, I want to make space and let Kjersti introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Dr. Kjersti VanSlyke-Briggs. I'm a professor at SUNY Oneonta in secondary education and educational technologies. And I made eye contact, unfortunately, and now I'm chair this year.
And Thor, we were just introducing ourselves. Hi, Thor, I'm not hearing your sound come through.
Oh, he's on mute.
I'm sorry. It's what happens when you're rushing from teaching a class and trying to get in and get here on time. So my apologies, I'm late. I was teaching a class. Class is still in session, but I have a TA finishing that class. So my name is Thor Gibbins, and I am associate professor in secondary education, focusing on English and literacy education. And that's who I am.
So thanks to all for being here. Thor, can you
And
tell us a
I
little
get
bit
to be
about how we got
get
started?
to be the first speaker of this. So why this book? So um I about a year and a half ago, I was rereading. We wrote an original OER textbook for our 1060 class, and I was rereading the chapter that I wrote on the philosophy of education, and I was really unhappy with my chapter. Like I wanted to do more with it, and so I was like talking with Kjersti about we should redo this OER textbook. I felt that our textbook kind of was one. It was very milk toast. It was it was almost like a Wikipedia. That's what it felt for me. And I think what I felt was missing from this book was the stance that teaching is political. There you are, even if you don't think you are, it is a political stance when you walk into the classroom. You're engaging in an ideology or critiquing an ideology, and it's something I wanted our pre-service teachers to start thinking about. That is not neutral. Teaching is not neutral, and they need to start becoming aware of that because I'm approaching that it seems to me, and I don't want to be like the doomer, it seems to me like the world is on fire, and we need to start coming together beyond just electoralism and to try to solve the myriad problems that we face in our communities, but in the world in general, but starting focusing. Sorry, I get a phone call in the middle of my, so um, that we need to start thinking about. Hi, Suzanne. Because I'm in the middle of a conference right now. I don't remember. I don't think so. Sorry. I apologize. Our admin assistant keeps ringing me and she didn't like that I hung up on her. So, and so that moves to the next, the third bullet point, which is I was reading an Ed Journal article around mediated stories around teachers, and they had a call of action for teacher educators to examine or to add in their education courses some type of discussion around how we can do critical media analysis of how teachers are constructed in popular media in film and television. And that got me inspired to kind of like think about how we could create a chapter that would use counter storytelling to kind of like counter the narratives, which a lot of the narratives around teachers throughout our history of media in our country has kind of been either teachers as saints that need to like, almost be like missionaries and give up their entire lives to the profession or as kind of like either villains or, troublemakers, that type of thing. So I wanted to create a chapter around doing counter storytelling to get students to start deconstructing the mediated narratives that they may have internalized and why they want to become teachers, and get them to challenge the reasons why being teachers. Because if they go into the teaching profession with these kind of romanticized narratives about being a teacher, they're going to be sadly disappointed and maybe leave the profession. And then finally, I wanted, as we started talking about this book and why we wanted more critical perspectives or critical framing of each chapter, I wanted to really forge some way of throughout the entire book of how teachers, students, parents, and community can work together in solidarity to then solve these kind of systemic problems that I feel that we need to start thinking about really tackling on a day-to-day basis. And without that kind of organizing between teachers, students, parents, and the community, it's going to be really difficult to solve the problem that our schools are facing. So that is why this book, and I
I
apologize
think
for the
this is
phone call
really
in the middle of
important too in conversations around OER. When we choose to create OER, I think it's very important that we have a purpose and a stance and something that we want to express, especially as we're getting further into a reality where the generative AI is getting more polished and more complete. And we're seeing a lot of people look to generative AI to be the producer of OER. I would actually like to put a counter argument in front of those people that says that we need to take stances as educators and we need to look at those political actions that education is, and that when we create these books and these materials, they should reflect us and our values. And so when we start our presentation with why this book, I hope that you're seeing that in there and seeing that as perhaps counter or a separate argument from those that are looking at utilizing a lot of AI to produce open content.
All right, so I'm going to take over for the next couple of slides. I want to talk just a little bit about the audience. So as Dr. Gibbins mentioned, this text is primarily used in our Education 1060 course, and that is our Issues in Education course. It is the introduction to education for all of our students at SUNY Oneonta. That's both elementary and secondary education students. So it's the first entry into our coursework. And then it's also interesting because we have a new partnership that we've been fostering for the last couple of years, and another location just added this year, where we're offering this course in local high schools. So we have two sites right now. One of them is a BOCES site, and that's serving, I think there's 7 different schools that are partaking in that location. So it was important for us to, as we were crafting this text, to really think about the readability of the text and the accessibility of the text, because we had a range of readers that this book had to meet the needs of. So, if we're thinking about 16-year-olds versus 19-year-olds, somewhere within that range, and then some non-traditional students as well. So a couple of things that we thought about as we made sure that we did that, taking a look at fine-tuning the use of our academic discourse within the presentation of each one of the chapters, really thinking wisely about the level of the reader who's coming to the text and our own assumptions that we make when we think about how we are presenting academic language. So Thor and I are both literacy professors, and so this is work that is near and dear to our hearts as well, as making text accessible for students. Within that, we really made sure that we considered how we are presenting new vocabulary and new concepts to the students. So as we look through the text, there is obviously glossary words that are in there that are bolded. They appear within the chapters of the text. There are sidebars that explore concepts in more depth that students may be unfamiliar with, but are still central to understanding the general gist of that particular chapter. And as we were doing this, I actually shared some parts of the chapters that I was writing with my students in one of my literacy courses. And we talked about how to best present this material for new readers. So I kind of got some double duty. I got advice from my students, and then also the students were able to make some connections in terms of determining how to make vocabulary accessible for their own future students. Another interesting thing that I did is the 2 chapters that I wrote, and I'll talk about those in a minute, is that I took advantage of the fact that I have a teenager in my house and I forced her to read my chapters just to give me a little bit of insight from a live teen reader. And then another component that I did, talking about AI, trying to use AI in a positive way, I utilized Claude and I fed Claude my chapters and I said, okay, tell me all the vocabulary words that may be challenging for a 10th grade reading level, 11th grade reading level, and so on. And then I was able to take a look at the different needs of different readers that would be coming to that text. One of the other things that we really made sure that we took some time to consider were the images that were embedded within the text, and then also the links that we embedded within the text so that we were able to extend knowledge for some of the students. We don't want to assume that they're all coming to a text with the same contextual lens, the same experiences and backgrounds. So we wanted to make sure that we had some images and some links that would lead to videos, for instance, or other websites that could give more information to students. So I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a side route for just a second and talk about the 2 chapters that I wrote. One of the chapters was on activism and advocacy, talking about our unions, talking about how teachers can be activists, talking about some of the major events that have happened through in history and education in the United States in terms of both activism and advocacy. And so there's a little bit of history setting there. There's some goal setting for our own students. One of the activities that we leave them with is to think about new challenges, because I want this book to live longer than whatever the current issue is that is being explored. So when we thought about our readers and the variety of experiences that they're coming with, we also crafted activities and experiences that they can partake in with their peers in the classes that they're taking, even if it's in the high school or if it's at the college, so that they can share their knowledge base and make connections with the text. The second chapter that I had was on ethics, and then I also talked about the ethic of care in that chapter. And again, taking into consideration some of what Thor was saying earlier, the idea that we need to move beyond the narratives that are being spun in, popular media about teachers, and talk about, that idea that teachers are more than just coming to a classroom because of the why. That's the thing I keep hearing, like, what's your why? Why are we motivated? I have a mortgage to pay. That's my motivation, that kind of thing. So having a realistic look at it, because we don't want to embrace those false narratives about what education really is like. That's one of the reasons we're seeing such a high turnover within the first 5 years of teachers entering the field. The expectation does not meet the reality of what they are facing. All right, so Ed, if we can go to the next slide. So talking about some initial responses, one of the interesting things about this course is, as I mentioned, there are a lot of sections of this course. We typically have about 12 sections in one academic year of this course. We have a coordinator who oversees this course, and this individual has worked with us on this book, also is one of the authors of the text, and also is a principal coordinator or driver of the common assessments that are used across all of the sections of this course. And so in conversations with her about how students are responding to the book and how faculty are responding to the book, we're hearing some positive commentary back. The faculty who are piloting the book right now, this is the first semester that it's being deployed in our classes, are having good responses to it, and we're continuing to build materials for that. As she has met with the faculty in the smaller groups, one of the things that keeps coming up is they want more resources, they want more activities. And so that's one of the things that we're hoping, maybe we can have a supplemental component to this that would travel with the text itself, that would be suggested activities if people wanted to use those. Although, to be clear, each chapter does have activities already embedded in them. These are more for guidance that would assist the faculty members themselves, not necessarily for the students. Also noted, the faculty have talked about how students are blind to some of the components of the text. So they read and they're skipping sidebars, they're skipping grayed out boxes of call out boxes because they're understanding the material as they're going and they're not slowing down enough to go through the additional components. So what a lot of the faculty members have done is they're using the videos that are embedded in the text as part of their instruction during the class period. In terms of the students' responses, so far the students are responding well from what she is hearing. And in particular, they did mention the vocabulary and how we handle the vocabulary is very beneficial to their reading of the material. I can't wait till we get closer to the end of the semester and we get some more feedback from both the faculty and the students. And in particular, the high school students, I'm very interested to see how they are responding. And so one of the things that we're going to be asking our coordinator to do is to send a survey to both the faculty and students so that we can get some additional information from them as we continue to refine the text. All right, I'm going to turn it back to you, Ed.
Yeah. So, I'm a huge advocate for building OER in SUNY. I think it's part of what we should be doing as a system. And, these one-year grants, it's great to be funded, but these one-year grants can be a challenge in terms of like getting it done within a single year. For a project this scale, I don't think you can do that. And so our year of funding is over, and here we are at the fall of 2024, and here we are piloting this version of the book that I wouldn't even call the first edition yet. This is kind of like our pilot version. We knew that this was going to still have some revisions and still be working towards something that will continue to be better. And so we're gathering that feedback now and in the winter with people who've actually used this kind of version 0.9. And what we'll be working on and transitioning to in the spring is we'll start to do the final review. We'll be sending out page proofs to all of the individual authors based on the edits they've done based on that feedback. We'll get that all signed up, and then we'll be launched. Both we have the online edition, of course, is already launched, but we will have a print edition launched as well, so that we have kind of multiple means because we are using Pressbooks to build this. So we do have that website version, we do have an EPUB version, and we will have a PDF version that will be print ready, and we can go and get that bound and have something for the authors and the students who choose it. Although we do know increasingly students are choosing those digital versions, it will be nice to have that physical version as well. Because it just feels different when you have that physical book in your hand after you worked so hard on it for 2 years. So even if it's just for me, I'll make sure that there are copies of that physical version. Um, um, we wanted this talk. We've talked a lot about what the book actually is, but we also wanted to just share a little bit about how we worked and how we worked with each other. We were working through shared documents and shared folders. And one of the things that was, having worked on multiple creation projects in the past, one of the things I did not want is I didn't want technology to slow down the authors. Writing textbook chapters is hard. And so I wanted them to be able to work in whatever tool they were already comfortable with and they were already familiar with. And if that means that they want to do all of the authoring and even the editing and even the revisions in Microsoft Word, I want to be able to support that and not get bogged down in, oh, Pressbooks and logins and images. I've just seen too many authors derailed because they're starting to try to find Creative Commons license images, and then they never got to writing their actual chapter because they're focused on the images and other things. So we wanted to try to streamline this and say, like, no, no, this is a funded project. We have support. This is what we can do from the Faculty Center for you. And so what we finally did is we ended up with a process where they were all working through either Google Docs or Microsoft Word, whatever they were more comfortable in. All the reviews were handled through those systems. And then Pressbooks was going to be the final step, where once the chapter feels a little bit locked, then I will do that import into Pressbooks, and then it will be there and ready to go. And we're keeping that Google Doc folder where it is so that we can continue to use this even as we do future revisions. Because right now all of these are matched line by line. So even as we've talked about, with recent revisions and things we want to change, what the authors are going to do is they're going to go back into that original document with track changes turned on so that I can see exactly what they changed. I'll move that over to Pressbooks and then I'll accept that change, and that will then those two documents will be synced back up again. So we're going to continue to use those shared documents even going forward into the future. And I hope that that helps us keep editing, revising, and treating this as a first step and not a last step. Thor, is there anything you want to add to that? I just saw you come off camera, so I thought you might wanted to add. You don't have to.
No, no, there's nothing. You're doing better than I can do it, so you're fine.
So I'm going to get really technical, and I promise it's only going to be for a couple minutes, okay? One of the things that we wanted to do, one of my goals on here was I wanted to produce a text in PDF form that everyone felt a lot of pride in and maybe looked better than some of the default exports that we do in Pressbooks. Pressbooks does a very nice job, but I wanted to see if I could go and do a next level kind of project. And so one of the things that this included was creating a child theme for Pressbooks. In Pressbooks, when you create a child theme or you create a theme, it's the styling. It's how much space is there in the margin? What size is the text? What colors are you using throughout it? And I wanted to do something that was very custom to our project, and not just use one of the 16 pre-made styles that are already there in Pressbooks. This is not for the faint of heart, and it's not for everybody, but it's something that I really wanted to do, partly as a learning experience for me. So if you ever, are browsing GitHub as, one normally does and go and looking at code, if you look at Beck EJ, which is me, 13820, which is the zip code of Oneonta, New York, you can see we have a theme, Pressbooks Press. And the most important thing in the Pressbooks child theme is actually these 9 files, these SCSS files. And I'll show you what that looks like. If you look into a Pressbooks child theme, the code that makes it work is very similar to CSS, but it's a different syntax and written at a different level. And what Pressbooks has done is they've created a structured vocabulary where they have a list of, hey, here are the different attributes that you could edit. And if you know the basics of CSS or SCSS, you can use those and change those to be exactly what you want. So I'm in the sheet that's titled Section Titles, which is the top of every chapter. And these were the rules that I was writing to make that top of the chapter look exactly the way that I wanted it to look. And I'll show you here that style that they use is called buckram. And so there's a website, buckram.pressbooks.org. And so I can go and look and, okay, they have a variable called section title border bottom color. And if I go and override that variable, something different will happen on all my export pages. And you can see in here, some of these things can be different depending on what output you're putting in. So it'll look one way on the web, it will look one way in the PDF, it will look one way in the e-text. And you can go and start to micromanage that so that in my document, I can say, you know what? I want a half of line of space underneath my web, but on the PDF, I want it to be a little bit closer together. I want that to be 0.25. For those of you that are zoning out because this is too technical, I promise I am almost done. This was the result that we got from doing that level of micromanaging. One thing that this author group wanted to do is they wanted to have a lot of white space in the document. So one thing that our theme does that no other Pressbooks theme does that I'm aware is it builds those wide margins on the outside of the textbook. We think that makes it very readable and keeps that low column. Then what we did was we started to float our vocabulary to the outside. When a vocabulary word was used in a paragraph, we wanted to then have the definition there directly in the margin, right next to where that student was reading the vocabulary word for the first time. This is the type of thing that Pressbooks doesn't do out of the box, that we had to build that custom theme for. And I'm just very pleased with how it came out, but it was not easy. It was not for the faint of heart. I do not know if I would build another custom theme just for an individual project. I hope that what I have done is actually reusable. So if someone wants to do this type of work and wants their book to look very similar to what we've produced, that theme is available on GitHub and it could be installed on different Pressbooks networks, shared with an open license, just like we share our content with an open license. But that was the end result there. The other thing that I wanted to share about what we did is we did commission some custom artwork for the book that could then be shared with a Creative Commons license. And again, it goes to the aesthetics of the book. I've been involved in a lot of OER creation projects, and those of you that have done that and done that with me, you know that sometimes the art or the photos or the figures in an OER project can be very disjointed because we're just looking for what has that open license on it. And then they don't have a similar look and feel and tone throughout it. And so one of the things that we started to talk about early on are what are the things that every chapter is going to have, or every that's going to bind this book together because we have in common. And one of the things that we started to zone in on was meet the theorists, or meet the people who are talking or do their scholarship about these things. And so what we started to do was I had a very talented intern and student at SUNY Oneonta, Natalie Frank, who we paid to work on this book and created a whole series of custom illustrations to go along with the text. And I was just so pleased at how that became a unifying factor of the book, that they had that kind of graphic novel design and style. And that was something that, like, okay, this is here in every chapter, is that we're featuring these thinkers and these people. And it's something that I remain really proud of, and happy that I could give that experience to a student worker. And that student worker was so talented that it came out so well. Um, and so just seeing what that kind of looks like on our final designed page, that this is one spread of the textbook. This is what page 46 and page 47 look like. And we've done that theme work. We have those illustrations, and we are highlighting these people throughout the book. One of the things with OER is you share it and you share it broadly, and everyone has permission to adopt this book and everyone has permission to use it in their course. And even you can take it and modify it for your own audiences and your own purposes. But I would just really encourage you to reach out to us and let us know if you are going to choose to adopt our book, or if you want more information about our book, because we really would love to know people's opinions if they are using it, because we will build that into our continuous improvement process that we're at this point. Um, I'll also just drop the link to the book in the chat. It is on our Pressbooks network for SUNY, and you can see it there. And I just want to thank you for coming to this presentation. And we have time for questions if anybody wants to ask any questions. Pulling up the chat. People appreciative of the student work. Thank you. Catherine said they're going to suggest it to some colleagues. When you create OER, you're giving all of those licenses. The if you support OER and OER work on your campus, one of the best things you could do is refer good high quality OER to colleagues, whether you're sending it to a department chair or sending it to a colleague that teaches that course. If anyone wants to share our work with the people who teach their introductory education courses, that would be a huge favor to us as an author team, because we have spent a lot of time, energy, and effort on this 2-year project, and now you just want to see it used and be useful to as many people as you can. Can you elaborate on your concerns about generative AI for OER? Um, Generative AI is fine, but think about what Thor said as he was introducing this. When we're writing textbooks, sometimes we end up with a document that doesn't take a stance. Some people believe, other people believe, and I will present these both as equal and equivalent and then move on. I will have the representative example and I will move on. And I think that the way that generative AI was trained, in that it was trained on a large body of text, the body of text it was trained on has biases built into it. And that if we aren't careful and discerning, that we will lose the bits of knowledge and stances that we have that are better than the generative AI. An example that I would say, and this is not an Ed Beck original example. I saw it on LinkedIn, and I'm stealing it without attribution because I don't remember who originally shared it. They went through an exercise and they asked ChatGPT to name 10 philosophers. And it came up with a list that looks like the syllabus to the course that I took at 2005 at Lemoyne College in an introduction to philosophy. Name 10 philosophers. Oh, okay, Socrates, Plato. I went to a Jesuit school, so we had others. And then the person continuing the prompt said, "Hey, I noticed that you only listed 10 men. Could you make a list that has some women involved in it?" Finally added in some women to the list, many of which were the very common examples that were, written into the textbooks that I worked with and that I had in, 2004 in high school. And so, okay, a little bit better. But I noticed that all of the people that you chose were from Western civilizations. Could you make sure that some world cultures are represented? Oh, here's a new list, and now we see Confucius and we see, but ChatGPT, you forgot that I wanted a gender diverse list, and you've given me all men again, of even though now you're inclusive around the world. And so it's just a silly example, and it's still and it's still and it's not, a well-formatted, argument. But I think that when we hear people say, generative AI is the new OER, we should stop creating OER, I would push back on that and say, I think there are ways that we can use generative AI. There are ways that we can incorporate generative AI into our writing process, but there are certain stances that we should make sure are in our introductory classes. And I hope that this text is an example of that.
And can I jump in on the generative AI? And I've done some talks
Absolutely.
on doing more critical media analysis of generative AI. Basically, you're using machine learning that predicts what word would come next. And so what you're going, and it's using a large data set of kind of like polling statements from up until 21, and it's social media is predominantly the sources. And so what it's polling is kind of a regression toward the mean of maybe possibly the worst of humanity that has to offer, meaning you're gonna get like again what I said, what I was unhappy with my chapter, this milk toast kind of Wikipedia post, and it does miss that critical perspective, and also generative AI will hallucinate answers as well. So what happens is then you might have to double down and do some really deep, close reading of what's getting produced. And so I would just recommend writing it yourself, and that way at least you know where you're getting your sources from and how you're sourcing the material. Because there are certain generative AIs that will give you the sources it's pulling from, but I recommend, yeah, um, the way generative AI writes is not how human beings compose writing pieces, because it's linear. Generative AI writes linearly. I can't even speak. It just predicts what word would come next after the next. And that's just not how writing does. Writers think thematically around, and it's more recursive and
Yeah. And to me, generative AI is a fine tool.
no,
Kjersti wrote
yeah,
something
I
and ran it
actually
through the generative AI and said, help me understand what vocab words might be difficult for a 10th grader to understand, an 11th grader to understand, or 11th grade reading level, not an 11th grader. But
or in or indexing, because I think Kjersti mentioned when we were talking about how we could use it to like kind of that kind of really the task that no one really wants to do, kind of generating kind of indexing of your textbook would work really well. I used AI to like do like remixing activities of kind of like, do genre analysis of why generative AI is terrible writing and get students to look closely at what gets produced, and then maybe use it as a remixing tool. Like, let's remix what was made into a different genre, which I think those are kind of fun and interesting aspects of how we could use the AI in kind of more creative outlets. But having it produce stuff, it will just kind of, and it'll start being repetitive after one paragraph. It'll start sounding like the same thing over and over again. Well,
so Joe, that was a lot. I hope it answers your question. I'm not anti-AI. I just think there's reasons to continue to create OER that is not AI generated. It is 2:07. I think this presentation was supposed to go to 2:15. So we have time for other questions if anybody's got one. Joe, I saw you turn your camera on. If you wanted to come off mute and say something, you're welcome to as well.
Looking for the timing.
Okay, Lynette, can you stop the recording?